Today's novel doesn't deal very heavily in science, but it does take place in a hypothetical future and is thus science fiction. On the docket today is a book called Parable of the Sower, published in 1993 by Octavia E. Butler. About the author. Octavia Butler was born in Pasadena, California in 1947. Pasadena is a suburb of Los Angeles, and perhaps because of that, it was a racially integrated community even before the civil rights movement took off in the 50s and 60s. But, that being said, Butler's parents, both black, were on the bottom rung of society, working as a shoe shiner and housemaid. Butler herself had a hard childhood, and not just because of her race. She was terribly shy as a child, and so to her, books were a refuge from a harsh reality. As such, she would end up gravitating to the bright futures of mid-century science fiction. Butler would soon become interested in writing as well as reading, but while she penned her first story when she was 12, it would take until college for her to start getting money for her writing. Nevertheless, she was fully dedicated to the art and lost a lot of sleeping hours to write her stories. Butler would finally gain recognition in 1973. That was the year she met Harlan Ellison through a minority mentoring program set up by the Screenwriters Guild of America. Ellison was a notorious misanthropist, but he knew talent when he saw it, and he was one of the first people to buy one of her short stories. Later that decade, Butler wrote her first novels, the Patternist series, and by 1978, she made enough money through writing to make it her full-time job. In 1984, Butler won her first Hugo Award for the short story Speech Sounds, and in 1985, she won another Hugo and a Locus Award. However, the book we're looking at today may be one of her most famous. Parable of the Sower came out in 1993, and in 1995, the MacArthur Foundation gave her a fellowship, a so-called genius grant that the foundation hands out to about 24 Americans every year. The MacArthur Foundation focuses on things like climate change and human rights abuses, and the grants they hand out are generally given to people who are working to make the world a better place. Octavia Butler was the first science fiction writer to ever win a fellowship, and Parable of the Sower was very likely the reason she got it. In 1998, Butler followed up Parable of the Sower with Parable of the Talents. She fully intended to keep going with more books in the series, but she eventually gave up because the research was depressing her too much. So she moved on to other stories in other settings, and her final novel, written in 2005, was Fledgling, a book about vampires and culturally inspired violence. Butler would die in early 2006 of a stroke. She was 58. But that's enough real depressing events. Time to discuss some fictional depressing events with the story. The book begins in the distant future of 2024, so about 30 years from when the book was written. The United States is in a freefall. Gas and resource costs are going up, climate change is causing an endless string of disasters, wages are going down, jobs are disappearing, cities are emptying out, and society is collapsing. The infrastructure, organization, and law enforcement needed to keep production up are gone, and as a result, people are starving, going homeless, and dying of easily curable illnesses. Violence is escalating everywhere as desperate, hungry people attack those who appear even slightly better off than they are. The police are no help because they've become just one more armed gang who will show up, demand a service fee, and then maybe beat someone up, possibly you, before calling it a day and going home. The inner cities are essentially gone. Nothing but chaos, rape gangs, and addicts, high on a new drug called pyro that makes watching fires feel as good as sex. Naturally, this means that there are also a lot of arsons going around lately. Still, there are some enclaves of civilization left. A suburban neighborhood, or even just a cul-de-sac, will build a sturdy wall, buy some guns, and patrol their shared land to keep out thieves and arsonists. American corporations have folded thanks to the loss of their customer base, but foreign corporations have started building safe havens so that they can exploit the local labor force. Of course, they've also started using the unfair practices used in the 19th century, like trust busting and fixing prices so that you'll be in debt to the corporation forever. In some cases, they don't even bother pretending that you're not a slave. Into this world was born our protagonist and narrator, Lauren Olamina. Lauren was born with a condition called hyperempathy, which means that she can feel other people's pain to such an extent that, back when she was a child, she would spontaneously bleed if she hurt someone. She's supposed to feel other people's pleasure too, but there's precious little of that since this country started falling apart in the 2010s. Lauren isn't that old when the book starts either. One of the first events she describes is her and other kids in her neighborhood getting baptized by her father, a Baptist minister. Despite her father's profession, however, Lauren has come up with her own God and her own religion, one that fits the chaotic times. She believes that God is change, the very existence of change, and so God is unpredictable, kind or cruel at random, but also something you can shape, direct, learn from, and adapt to. Lauren names her new religion Earthseed because she also believes that it's humanity's destiny to leave Earth and spread throughout the galaxy like the seeds of a dandelion. Most of the older generation in Lauren's neighborhood is in a state of denial, believing that, despite how utterly horrible things have become, they will eventually turn a corner and start going back to the way they used to be. Lauren, seeing as her God is change, does not hold out this hope, and instead prepares an emergency kit, in case she ever has to leave in a hurry. She plans on leaving the neighborhood when she turns 18 and heading north, away from the ruins of Los Angeles to the south. There are stories about people fleeing the United States and going to Canada, but Canada has been swamped by refugees and is now taking strict measures to enforce its border. Still, heading north sounds better than staying put and waiting for the ruined people of a ruined city to finally breach the walls. Lauren's original plan is to go north with her boyfriend, who also wants to get out while the getting's good, but their community gets attacked before they can go. In July of 2027, a gang of pyro addicts overwhelm the guards, burn the houses, and rape and kill the inhabitants. Lauren escapes on her own with her emergency kit and manages to grab some stuff from her house before scavengers take everything, but her family dies, and she only finds 2 survivors of the neighborhood. One is Zara, a younger wife of a man who started his own religion just so he could practice polygamy. The other is Harry, a white boy, unlike Zara and Lauren who are black, of about Lauren's age. The 3 buy some supplies from a heavily guarded store complex and then head north on Interstate 118. With the country gone to shit, the only people using the freeway these days are pedestrians going north and the occasional armored truck barreling down the road. As they move north, Lauren starts talking about her Earthseed philosophy, and the group starts growing as they stop to help strangers. Lauren helps defend an interracial couple with a baby. Race has become a bigger deal with society crumbling, and the couple decide to follow them for a while before Lauren invites them to join. On the road, they meet an older man in his 50s, pushing a cart. His name is Taylor Bancoli. He and Lauren bond since both of their last names come from the Yoruba language of West Africa. It was apparently popular in the 1960s for African Americans to change their last names to something African, and both of their ancestors had chosen Yoruba words. Then there's an earthquake, and the group dig a pair of sisters out from under a collapsed chimney. They get attacked by scavengers, and Lauren finds out that she can in fact kill a man if she has to, despite her hyperempathy. Lauren's group also start listening to her Earthseed teachings, mostly because she's offering hope and community at a time when there's precious little of either one. Lauren and Bancoli hit it off in particular, which is more than a little skeevy since he's old enough to be her father, and that's part of what attracts her to him. Still, this is a time and a place where skeevy is peanuts compared to the human rights abuses committed left and right. And besides that, Bancoli knows of a place up north where they might be able to settle. His sister owns a small plot of farmland north of San Francisco and Sacramento. Lauren's group here on a portable radio that the San Francisco Bay Area has turned into a hellscape of scavenging and violence thanks to that earthquake, and so they take a detour to get them around the Bay Area without going through. Along the way, they pick up a few escaped slaves, who also have hyper-empathy. The condition is apparently sought after in slave labor because it makes people easier to control. Then they get attacked by a gang of pyro addicts, and while they chase them off, they take some casualties. When the group reaches Bancoli's sister's farm, they discover that the place has burned down, and everyone inside is dead. They thought the farm would be safe since it was remote, but it just wasn't remote enough. But despite what happened, the farm is still the group's best chance of starting something new without getting robbed, raped, and killed, and the book ends with the start of the very first Earthseed community. The analysis. I would be remiss if I started with anything but the title. The parable of the sower is told by Jesus in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. To paraphrase, a sower dropped some of his seeds on the road, and birds flew down and ate it. Some seeds fell on rocky ground and withered because they had no roots. Some seeds fell under thorny bushes, and the bushes choked out the sunlight. But some few seeds fell into fertile soil and grew, and the yield was 100-fold. The Gospels also provide an interpretation of the parable. Jesus is the sower, and his seeds are the good word, but most people won't truly understand it for one reason or another. However, those who do get it will be so much greater for it that it's all worth the effort. Notably, Jesus told the parable to a large crowd, but only explained it to his disciples. The parallels between the parable and the novel story are fairly clear. The chaos of societal collapse is forcing a massive struggle between segmenting groups, much like the struggle of the seeds. Those who die without a chance are the seeds eaten by the birds. Those who fall into slavery, either to the corporations or to the gangs, are the ones that wither. Those consumed by thorns are the exploiters, the gangs of arsonists, and the slave drivers who stop caring about other people. But some few seeds find the right soil and grow into something incredible. And that would be the Earthseed movement. Octavia Butler put a lot of herself into this book, which I think is part of why the series was so hard for her to write. Like Butler, Lauren is a black girl who grew up in a racially mixed suburb of Los Angeles. She's shy, smart, and thoughtful, and one major reason she's shy is because the emotions of others can bring her a lot of pain. Butler invented hyper-empathy for the book, but the way it works is fairly similar to the very real social anxiety. That being said, Lauren isn't a perfect copy. From what I can tell, Butler never married, let alone married a man twice her age. But then, of course, there's the setting. Butler wrote this book in the late 80s and early 90s, and that definitely fits with the sort of apocalyptic future it depicts. Low-income neighborhoods were tearing themselves apart thanks to crack cocaine and gang violence. Gay people and heroin users were catching HIV, and it was spreading to the general population. And public perception was just starting to realize how much global warming could screw everyone over. As such, Parable of the Sower represents essentially a worst-case scenario. Law and order collapse, the environment collapses, and the few people with any power left are exploiting the little guy to hold on to as much of it as possible. Well, only in America, though. The rest of the world seems to get on, well, better than the United States at least. Still, since the novel is set in America, this book belongs to the post-apocalypse genre. There's a lot of overlap between that and the dystopia genre, especially since both are generally trying to make a point, but they do have an important distinction. In dystopian works, society is the problem, while in post-apocalyptic works, society is gone and needs rebuilding. It's because of that last bit that post-apocalyptic fiction tends to be more hopeful than dystopias. Yeah, everything we know is gone and millions or billions of people have died, but it's not over yet. There are still survivors, people who got through the worst of it and are rebuilding, adapting to the new order. Life goes on, people go on, even when governments and civilizations don't. Ultimately, life goes on is the message of most apocalyptic books, and it's certainly the message of this one. God is change. Change is inevitable, unstoppable, but also something you can harness. When something unusual happens, you can learn from it. When something new shows up, you can use it as an opportunity to improve your situation. When your way of life breaks down, you can rebuild yourself and be better than before. Change is blind and unthinking, but we aren't. We can do something useful, help each other out, even when the whole world is falling apart. So don't lose hope, especially when things look hopeless. Thanks for joining me again for today's book review, and I hope I'll see you next time for a story about one man trying to change a historical apocalypse.